The sky stuttered. That was the only way Natalie Pierce could describe. I toned second. The jet sliced through the clouds like a whisper of luxury. The next, everything jerked violently. Lights flickered, coffee sloshed. Her champagne flute shattered against the cabin wall. The pilot's voice cracked through the intercom, tight with panic. Engine failure. Repeat, right engine has failed. We're making an emergency descent. Natalie didn't panic. She didn't panic. She clenched the leather armrest and narrowed her eyes at the blinking screen displaying the flight path. The plane was rerouting to some airstrip she'd never heard of, somewhere in the middle of nowhere. She wasn't supposed to be here. Not on this jet, not in this storm, not at the mercy of some backwoods landing strip in a town small enough to disappear on a map. She had a board meeting in 4 hours and $1 billion launch in 10. This trip was routine: inspect a subsidiary facility, shake hands, fly back. Nothing was supposed to go wrong. And yet, here she was, unbuckled, furious, standing on a cracked tarmac surrounded by cornfields and cows. The humid air clung to her designer blazer like insult. The hangar looked like a rusted tin can propped up by stubbornness. It wasn't even part of the regional airport. They had to taxi the jet across a dirt road to reach it. Inside, the walls groaned with every gust of wind, and the scent of engine grease was thick in the air. And there he was, a man in a dark navy jumpsuit, sleeves rolled up, exposing lean arms marked with grime and sun. He stood with a wrench in one hand, squinting up at her jet like it was an old friend needing guidance. His hair was tousled, streaked with copper and silver. Behind him, a little girl in overalls drew spaceships in the dust with a stick. Natalie scoffed. "This is the mechanic?" The assistant pilot nodded. "Only one available for 60 miles. Name's Caleb Brooks." Caleb didn't look up right away. He walked slowly around the engine housing, dragging his fingers across the damage with quiet focus. No pleasantries, no handshakes. Just listening to the machine, not to her. Natalie tapped her heel. "Excuse me. This jet is a Pierce Aerotech Monarch 9. That engine failure shouldn't have even been possible. Do you know what you're looking at?" He finally glanced up. Caleb's eyes were calm, a shade of storm-washed blue. "You've got a collapsed bleed valve and a compromised pressure sensor." Engine nearly surged. She blinked. "That's not possible. Those parts were upgraded last quarter." Then, the upgrade failed. He crouched again, tapping lightly on a panel with his wrench. Or someone installed the wrong firmware. She folded her arms, jaw tight. "And you figured that out without diagnostics?" He gave a half shrug. "Sometimes the machine talks." Natalie wanted to laugh, wanted to roll her eyes, and call HQ and demand a new team, a real team. But something about him made her pause. Not just his confidence, but the way he spoke. No bravado. No need to impress. Just certainty. Her phone had no signal. Her assistant was useless. The pilot was pacing. The little girl in the corner looked up and smiled at Natalie, then quietly returned to her drawing. Caleb stood and reached for a tablet on a workbench. As he adjusted his sleeve, Natalie caught a glimpse of something inked on his forearm. A strange, geometric tattoo symbol, but sharp. Her breath caught. That symbol. She knew that symbol. It wasn't public. It belonged to a now defunct, classified engineering team under a government defense contract, the people behind the first Monarch prototype. Natalie had seen it once, long ago, on an old document buried in the vaults of Pierce Aerotech's acquisition archives. Only 7 engineers had ever been part of that team. All were supposed to be under NDA, long gone or retired. Her voice lowered. "Where did you get that tattoo?" He stilled, didn't look at her, just replied softly, "Does it matter?" "It does if you designed the engine you're now fixing in a barn." He finally turned to face her fully, and in his silence, she saw it. The weight, the history. And suddenly, Natalie Pierce, who had never once questioned her grip on any situation, felt the ground shift beneath her. Who was this man? The silence between them felt heavier than the jet engine still cooling behind them. Natalie didn't blink. "I asked you a question." Caleb didn't flinch. He gently placed the tablet down, wiped his hands on a rag, and finally met her gaze. His voice was steady. "I used to work where your company was born," he said, "long before the logo got shinier." Natalie's lips parted slightly. "You were with Ocelon Systems." Caleb gave the smallest nod. Ocelon Pierce Aerotech's predecessor. A once classified defense firm, bought out and buried by Natalie's father 2 decades ago. "No one from Ocelon was ever publicly listed," she said quietly. "Exactly." For a beat, neither of them spoke. Behind them, the sun dipped lower, casting a long orange haze across the hangar floor. The little girl Lily was now spinning slowly in the light, holding a paper airplane made from oil-smudged notebook paper. Natalie turned away from Caleb and looked at the jet. The engine panel he'd opened was indeed miswired. Sloppy. Dangerous. The kind of mistake that didn't happen in facilities like hers. "You knew what was wrong before we landed, didn't you?" she asked, softer now. "I saw the flameout pattern in the exhaust signature before your bird even touched the ground," Caleb said. "Could have told you from my porch." Natalie glanced around again. The workshop was crude, sure, but organized. Cables coiled with military neatness. Tools arranged with care. Blueprints sketched by hand still clung to a corkboard, behind him marked in equations far too advanced for a man everyone thought was just a grease monkey in a garage. "How did someone like you end up here?" she asked. Caleb's eyes dropped for the first time. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked over to Lily, who had now started stacking nuts and bolts into a tiny sculpture. He crouched beside her, brushed her hair out of her face, and smiled. "She likes to build little things," he said. "It calms her." Natalie felt her chest tighten unexpectedly. "Your wife?" she asked, barely audible. Caleb nodded. "She was brilliant. Smarter than I'll ever be. Taught at MIT. She was working on engine shielding protocols before they were even standard. Then one day." He stopped. Natalie waited. She found something she wasn't supposed to. A fault in the prototype. Same pressure sensor that failed today. She filed a report. 2 weeks later, her car hydroplaned off a clean road in clear weather. His voice was calm, but Natalie saw it now behind the stillness. Behind the beard and the oil-streaked sleeves, grief lived in him like marrow. "I didn't believe it was random, so I pushed. Too far, got warned. Then got offered a severance check and silence. I took my daughter and walked away." Natalie stepped back, leaning against a rusting toolbox. For the first time in years, she felt ashamed of her badge, of the empire she helped expand. The Monarch 9 was supposed to be flawless-er legacy, and yet here stood a man who warned them, decades ago, of a crack in its heart. A crack that almost cost her life. "You could have taken them down," she whispered. "I would have lost Lily," Caleb replied. "They knew that." Natalie closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, her voice had changed. "You were right, about the firmware. And the bleed valve. I'll report it." He nodded, still kneeling beside his daughter. "I'm not trying to be a hero," he said. "Just wanted to disappear. But you didn't. You stayed close enough to watch." Caleb didn't respond. He just stood up and walked to the jet, wiping his hands again. "I can fix it," he said. "By morning. But you won't find the sabotage on any readout. Someone wanted this failure. Either a contractor cut corners, or someone wanted a story to break." Natalie narrowed her eyes. "You think this was intentional?" "I think your board has enemies." She thought of Evelyn. Of the pressure to release the Monarch 10, the rushed timelines, the silent tension brewing among investors. For the first time, Natalie didn't want to be alone at the top. She looked at him. "Then help me find out who." Caleb froze. "Why would I do that?" "Because you still care," she said. "You never stopped." He hesitated. His eyes softened not with agreement, but memory. And then, Lily tugged on his pant leg. "Daddy, your sketch is flying." They turned. Her little paper airplane had caught the wind and floated into the sky, backlit by the orange-pink sun, dancing between the broken clouds. Natalie watched it drift, inexplicably moved. A piece of paper, crude, imperfect, still flying. Just like him, that night, the hangar lights hummed long after the town had gone dark. Caleb stood beside the jet, sleeves pushed to his elbows, grease smudged across his collarbone. The soft chirp of an old radio played jazz in the background, something scratchy and warm. Natalie watched him from the far end of the hangar, arms crossed, her once pristine suit jacket now slung over a chair, forgotten. She hadn't left since he agreed to help. Something in the air between them had shifted. Not trust, not yet, but a recognition, a silence that didn't need filling. Lily had fallen asleep hours ago, curled up in a worn recliner beside a tool cart, wrapped in Caleb's old flannel shirt. One hand clutched a sketch pad filled with ships and engines far more advanced than her years. Natalie moved closer, eyeing the exposed engine components spread out like a crime scene. "So how do we start?" she asked. Caleb didn't look up. "We already did." He handed her a table this own, far older than anything she'd seen in a lab recently. But the interface, the code, it was custom, sharp, clean. "These are telemetry logs from the last two Monarch 9S that reported pressure issues mid-flight," he explained. "And this," he pointed to a cluster of readings, "is your jet's log. See the pattern?" Natalie squinted. "Why would the sensor data be spoofed? It's acting like the system's healthy, right before it fails." He nodded. "Because someone programmed it to pass diagnostics, until it doesn't." She stiffened. "That's not just negligence, that's deliberate concealment." Caleb gave a quiet breath. "And this signature? The error injection pattern? I recognize the style. There were only 3 of us who ever used this kind of system bypass back at Ocelon. Me, Daniel Grant, and..." He stopped. Natalie's brow furrowed. "Who?" Caleb's jaw clenched. "Evelyn Ashcroft." The name cut the air like a wire snap. Natalie stepped back. "Evelyn? That's not possible. She doesn't even touch code. She's a board member." "She was a systems architect in the early days," Caleb said, voice low. "She wrote the first test failover for Project Lancer. The algorithm here mimics her logic trees exactly." Natalie blinked, trying to process it. "But why sabotage the Monarch?" "Pressure," Caleb said. "From inside, from competitors, from investors. If someone wanted the Monarch 10 launch accelerated, crashing the 9's credibility would force early release. Corners would be cut. Contracts rushed. Stock prices manipulated." He looked at her, eyes steady. "Sabotage is leverage." Natalie stared at the blinking lights on the engine bay, her thoughts spiraling. Evelyn had been like family. Trusted, sharp. But lately there had been changes. Strange decisions. Increased silence from certain boardrooms. Anonymous reports denied before review. And now, this. "I need proof," she whispered. Caleb nodded. "We'll find it. But first, your jet." He gestured toward the power panel. "I've isolated the corrupt firmware. I can patch it, but it'll just get overridden once you reconnect with corporate systems. Unless I stop the update manually," Natalie said. Caleb gave her a small, impressed look. "Exactly." She smirked faintly. "I may not be an engineer, but I read the original Monarch specs until my eyes bled." He chuckled. then we might just stand a chance. For a while, they worked in sync, Caleb guiding, Natalie adjusting, her hands finally blackened with grease and effort. And strangely, she didn't mind. The boardroom had always made her feel like she was performing a role. But here she felt real. As the night wore on, she found herself stealing glances at him, the way his jaw tightened in focus, the way he touched each wire with precision, the way he paused every now and then to glance at Lily, even in sleep, as if checking the world hadn't taken more than it already had. "Why didn't you fight back harder?" she asked quietly, while tightening a bolt. He didn't answer right away. Then, in a near whisper, he said, "Because I was angry, and anger doesn't build anything. Lily needed something steady, not a man drowning in revenge." Natalie paused, the wrench still in her hand. He looked at her. "You ever feel like your ambition outgrew your purpose?" She nodded before she even knew she was doing it. "All the time." And just like that, they understood each other, not as CEO and mechanic, not as legacy and exile, but as two people who once believed in building something meaningful and got lost along the way. Just then, Lily stirred. She sat up, rubbing her eyes, mumbling something about stars falling. Caleb walked over and scooped her into his arms, her cheek pressing against his shoulder. "Go back to sleep, kiddo. Tomorrow we fly again." Lily smiled faintly. "Did you fix it?" "Almost." Natalie watched them. A father who gave up the world for a child. A girl who seemed to know her father carried more than just tools in his hands, and she knew this was more than just a repair. This was a reckoning. By morning, the Monarch 9 gleamed beneath soft sunlight, her engines silent but ready-patched, recalibrated, and, for now, safe. Natalie stood just outside the hangar, sipping a bitter cup of gas station coffee as her driver pulled up in a black town car. She hadn't slept, but she didn't feel tired. Not in the usual way. Inside, Caleb adjusted Lily's backpack as she munched on a granola bar. She'd insisted on going with him to the airfield, arms outstretched like a co-pilot waiting for her orders. "You're really flying back today?" Caleb asked Natalie, wiping his hands on a clean rag. "I have to," she said. "There's a board meeting at noon. About the Monarch 10. And Evelyn." His jaw tensed slightly. "You're going to confront her?" "I have to start somewhere." She watched him carefully. "But I'm not walking in blind." Caleb handed her a thumb drive, an old, silver one, marked with a faded sticker of a space shuttle. Telemetry logs. Back-end firmware injections. I matched the logic patterns to old Lancer protocols. Evelyn designed herself. This should be enough to raise questions, if not burn it all down. Natalie took it, slipping it into the inside pocket of her blazer. The drive felt heavier than plastic, and Codate felt like trust. And maybe, for the first time in years, like doing the right thing. "Will you be okay?" she asked. Caleb nodded. "We'll be fine. Not just with Lily," she clarified. "With being found again." He paused. "I stopped hiding the day you landed." The words caught her off guard. He stepped forward slightly, voice low. "I'm not saying I'm ready to go back, but maybe it's time I stop pretending the world doesn't still need fixing." Natalie felt her breath hitch. For a moment, the tension between them wasn't about corporate sabotage or buried pasts. It was about something unspoken, about two people meeting at the edge of who they used to be, not sure who they were becoming. "Will I see you again?" she asked. He gave a crooked smile. "Depends. You gonna keep Crash landing in rural towns?" She smiled back. "No promises." She walked to the car, then hesitated, turned. "Caleb," she said, "if this goes badly, if they turn on me—" "They won't," he said, certain, "because you're not them." The door closed, and she was gone. Pierce Aerotech's headquarters in Chicago rose like glass fangs into the sky. Natalie stepped off the elevator into the executive wing, her heels echoing across marble floors. She looked different still, sharp, still poised. But something softer lived behind her eyes now. The boardroom was already full. Evelyn Ashcroft sat at the head of the table in a tailored navy pantsuit, her silver hair pinned tightly, her fingers laced beneath her chin. "Natalie," she greeted, "you made it." "Of course," Natalie replied. "Wouldn't miss this. We're here to finalize the Monarch 10 press release and investor call," Evelyn said, tapping a printed agenda. "I trust the field inspection went well?" Natalie sat slowly. It was enlightening. Evelyn tilted her head. "Is something wrong?" Natalie reached into her blazer and placed the thumb drive on the table. The room went still. "What is that?" Evelyn asked, her voice clipped. "Telemetry from the Monarch 9's failure. And a full logic map of the firmware injection that nearly killed everyone on board." Evelyn's smile tightened. "That's a serious accusation." "It's not an accusation," Natalie said. "It's math and legacy code. Yours." The board murmured. "I'm calling for an internal investigation," Natalie continued. "And until it's complete, I'm suspending the Monarch 10 rollout." The murmurs turned to chaos. Evelyn rose slowly. "You're making a mistake." "No," Natalie said. "I'm correcting one." Evelyn leaned in, her voice razor-thin. "You don't understand how many people you'll hurt with this. Do you think investors care about sabotage if it tanks their portfolios? Then they shouldn't have invested in lies," Natalie said. "We build things that fly. They'd better be able to stand the truth." Evelyn's stare sharpened, but she said nothing. Not yet. Not here. But Natalie could see at the crack. The shift. The Empire was no longer blind. Back in the hangar, Caleb was showing Lily how to map a circuit board using a crayon and a cereal box. "Do you miss it?" she asked suddenly. "What?" "The big labs, the glass walls, the ones that smell like computers and peppermint gum." He smiled. "Sometimes. But you like this better?" He looked at her, truly looked. "This? This is mine." She beamed, then paused. "Is Miss Natalie coming back?" Caleb exhaled slowly, eyes drifting toward the clouds. "Maybe. If she wants to." And in the sky above them, a Monarch 9 shimmered as it climbed lighter, steadier, and finally flying right. 2 days later, the wind had changed. Caleb noticed it before the weather. He felt it in the silence that wrapped the hangar, in the shift of the air when unfamiliar tires rolled across the gravel drive. He stepped outside, wiping his hands on a cloth, eyes narrowing as a sleek black sedan parked beneath the rusted sign of Brooks Aviation. The passenger door opened first. Natalie stepped out. But this time, she wasn't alone. A tall man in a charcoal suit exited behind her. Expensive shoes, cautious eyes, and a badge clipped discreetly to his belt department of aerospace safety and intelligence. Caleb didn't move, but something in his chest sank. Not fear, not surprise, just a quiet confirmation that peace was always temporary. Natalie approached first. "I should have called," she said. "You didn't have to," Caleb replied. "I felt the wind shift." She gave a small, tired smile. "We suspended Evelyn. The board backed the investigation. Turns out, she'd been orchestrating firmware, tampering across multiple production units. Inflated efficiency reports. Altered failure rates. It's bigger than we thought." The man beside her stepped forward. "Mr. Brooks, my name is Alan Reese. I'm with Daisy. We monitor defense-grade tech breaches. Your involvement with Project Lancer and your recent discovery make you uniquely valuable." Caleb shook his head before Reese even finished. "I've done my part." Natalie glanced at Lily, who sat inside the hangar, unaware, drawing in the same spot as always. "Caleb," she said gently, "they're asking you to consult. 'Not return.' You'd keep custody. Stay here. They just want your mind, your insight. Just for a few months. Caleb studied her. You think I want to crawl back into the world that buried my wife? No, she said softly. I think you want to make sure no one else gets buried the same way. Reese spoke again, tone softer. We're not trying to exploit you. We're trying to stop the next Evelyn before people die. Caleb didn't respond. Not right away. He turned away from them, walking toward the hangar. Lily looked up and waved. He forced a smile back. Then he stepped inside and closed the door. Inside, Caleb leaned on the workbench, staring at the half-repaired drone he and Lily had been building from scraps. He hadn't told her about Evelyn, or the engine failures, or the people who had started calling again. He wanted her to live in a world where paper airplanes and cereal box circuits were enough. But maybe that was a lie. Maybe silence wasn't the same thing as safety. Natalie waited outside. She didn't knock. She just stood there, letting him breathe. When he finally came out again, his eyes were calmer. Not decided, but awake. I'll review the files, he said. That's all. Reese nodded. That's all we're asking. They handed him a sealed folder thicker than it should have been and left without pressure. Natalie lingered. I didn't come just to bring them, she said after Reese was gone. Why then? Because I thought maybe you needed someone to remind you. You're not invisible anymore. Caleb looked down, then back at her. It was easier being invisible. I know, she said. But you're not the only one who built something worth saving, and maybe we fix it better together. She turned to go, then paused. I'm flying back next week, she said. The investigation's going public. I'll need someone to check the Monarch 10 diagnostics before the hearing. You have 100 engineers. I trust one. Their eyes met, and in that space, something unspoken passed between them again. Something gentle, cautious, but alive. After she left, Caleb sat beside Lily and opened the sealed folder. Diagrams, logs, photos of Monarch failures he hadn't seen, patterns he recognized instantly, and at the bottom his name. A copy of a document from 15 years ago, signed by his wife. She had warned about the bleed valve instability in writing. The report had been buried. And now, it was back. He stared at her signature until the edges blurred. Then, for the first time in years, he didn't feel like running. Late that night, Caleb stood outside the hangar, the stars sharp above him. Lily slept inside, curled beneath a blanket of her own drawings. He held the thumb drive Natalie had once carried. His fingers closed around it slowly. Tomorrow, he'd start writing again reports, code, truth. Not because the world deserved him, but because his daughter did. And because maybe, so did Natalie. The Capitol hearing room was cold with polished stone and sharper stairs. Reporters lined the edges like wolves in pressed suits. Cameras blinked. Screens flickered with schematics and failure reports. Above it all, the logo of Pierce Aerospace spun slowly on a monitor its wings, feeling more like a noose today. Natalie sat at the long oak table, hands folded, every fiber of her engineered calm tested. To her left sat 3 company board members. To her right an empty chair. One of the senators leaned forward, fingers steepled. Miss Pierce, do you have a technical expert present to validate your findings? Natalie swallowed. The chair beside her remained vacant. Then the doors creaked open. Heads turned. Footsteps echoed across marble. Caleb Brooks walked in, wearing nothing but a clean button-down and jeans. A plain messenger bag slung across his shoulder. No fanfare, no introduction, just presence. He sat down beside her, nodded once, and opened the bag. Natalie didn't say a word. But her eyes just for a second glimmered with a relief that looked dangerously close to trust. What followed wasn't a defense. It was a quiet dismantling. Caleb spoke not like an engineer, but like someone who'd bled for every bolt. He walked them through the bleed valve flaw, the one his wife had flagged years ago. He showed them the internal memos Evelyn had buried, the performance logs falsified by pressure, the real-time data from Natalie's emergency landing, which aligned perfectly with the patterns his wife had once predicted. "You built something beautiful," he said, not looking at Natalie but making sure she heard. "But it was rushed, and rushed things break." A senator asked, "So why come forward now?" Caleb hesitated. Then, "Because my daughter deserves a world where the truth isn't buried beneath profit margins." And the room fell silent. Natalie exhaled, slow, measured. Then she reached beneath the table, pulled out a small metal box, and opened it. Inside her resignation letter, she slid it forward across the table. "I built this company with ambition," she said quietly. "But Caleb reminded me that ambition without integrity is just vanity. I'm stepping down as CEO effective immediately, but I will remain as a consultant to help rebuild what we broke." No one clapped, but no one needed to, because the truth had finally spoken loud enough. Outside the building, the day was cold but clear. Caleb stood alone on the Capitol steps, his bag slung over one shoulder, watching the sky. Natalie joined him quietly, her breath visible in the morning chill. "They'll talk about this for years," she said. "They'll forget by Monday," Caleb replied. She smiled. "Maybe, but Lily won't." He looked at her then, really looked. "You didn't have to step down." "Yes," she said. "I did. If you're going to rebuild something from scratch, you have to be willing to tear the rot out by the roots." He let that sit. Then gently, "What will you do now?" Natalie hesitated. "There's an RBD grant being offered to develop sustainable jet tech for rural use. You once built a vertical lift engine in a barn. You still have that sketch?" Caleb raised an eyebrow. "You offering me a job?" "No," she said, smiling softly. "I'm asking if you'd build something with me." He didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, he pulled something from his bag, Lily's drawing of a plane with solar wings and big cartoon hearts, the one that had hung above his workbench for months. He handed it to her. "That's my co-designer," he said. They both smiled, something between pride and peace. Back home, Lily raced out of the hangar as the old pickup pulled in. She flung open the truck door before it even stopped. "Did you save the day?" she asked breathlessly. Caleb scooped her up in his arms. "Nope," he said, "but I told the truth. And sometimes, that's the start of saving it." She nodded solemnly. "Did you bring snacks?" He laughed. Inside the hangar, the sun poured through the rafters. The drone they'd built still sat unfinished. Lily ran to it, tugging at his sleeve. "Can we finish it now?" Caleb looked at her. Then, at the workbench. Then, at the sky outside. "Yeah," he said. "Let's finish it. Then let's fly it." That night, the wind picked up again. Not the kind that tears roofs off or rattles windows, but the kind that fills wings, that lifts things that used to stay grounded. In the corner of the hangar, the old engine Caleb once designed sat quietly, repaired, honored, no longer hidden. And somewhere nearby, two people who once lived behind glass in grief were beginning, slowly, to build something new. Not a company, not a legacy, just trust. And this time, they were building it right.